你有没有发现一件很奇怪的事？过去这2年，菲律宾在南海问题上对中国最强硬，最靠美国。结果现在呢，突然开始讲一句话，要跟中国重新沟通，甚至讨论联合开发南海能源。你觉得这是外交转向吗？不是。我跟你讲，很简单3个字，撑不住了。为什么呢？菲律宾这次干了一件史无前例的事情，他宣布全国能源紧急状态。这是重点。什么叫能源紧急状态？那就是电不够，油不稳，价格失控，经济要出问题。那再把背景拱起来看，全球能源市场紧张，通胀压力上升，中东局势不稳。这个时候问题来了，美国能不能帮菲律宾解决能源？答案是不能。美国可以给你军舰、导弹、安全承诺，但它不能给你便宜能源，稳定你国内的物价和帮你扛通胀。所以菲律宾现在的逻辑很现实，安全靠美国，经济要活命就得来找中国，这就叫两面下注。那注意一个细节，这次不是普通外交暖和，而是直接讲到南海联合能源开发。这是什么等级？这是主权争议区加能源加法律问题。换句话说，最不能碰的现在开始碰了。最关键的是谁在讲话？菲律宾参议院甚至参议长，这些人之前可是最反中的。那现在呢？开始支持和中国合作开发资源，这说明什么？不是态度变了，是现实逼的。很多人会说，美国不是有安全保护伞吗？对，但问题是，现在大家开始怀疑这个保护伞有没有用。那为什么呢？看中东，伊朗用什么？用便宜的无人机加导弹饱和攻击，结果呢？连美国在波斯湾的军事体系都被压制，这件事的冲击很大。东南亚国家都在看，日本在看，新加坡在看，菲律宾当然更在看。他们突然意识到一件事情，美国的安全承诺未必挡得住现实的战争。那你说，如果真的发生冲突，谁来承担后果？美国过去10年有一个核心战略，综合威慑中国。什么意思呢？就是拉一圈日本、菲律宾、新加坡、澳大利亚全部绑在一起，形成一个围堵圈。但这个战略有一个前提，这些国家必须愿意一直站在美国这边。但现在问题来了，菲律宾开始动摇了。那接下来呢？日本会不会更谨慎？东南亚会不会更中立？只要有一个国家开始重新调整与中国关系，整个战略就会出现裂痕。还有一个更现实的因素，菲律宾要进入选举周期了。现在谁领先？是副总统萨拉杜特尔特。他的立场是什么？他是对中国更务实，甚至偏友好的。这意味着什么？这意味着政治风向正在变。不是今天变，是未来几年都会变。这个变化不只是南海，会直接影响一个更敏感的地方，台湾。为什么呢？因为美国的整个防御体系是从关岛到冲绳到台湾到菲律宾一整条链。现在如果菲律宾不配合了，这条链就会出现断点。而且你再看一个细节，台湾内部也开始压制军费的增加，对美国高端武器采购开始犹豫。这说明连台湾都在重新计算风险。所以这件事你不要看成是菲律宾亲中了，太天真。这件事的本质是，当现实成本上来，所有国家都会变现实。一句话总结，安全可以靠美国，但生存必须靠自己。而现在中国在提供什么？中国提供市场、能源合作和经济机会。所以你会看到一个趋势，不是谁倒向谁， 而是所有国家都在重新算账。国际政治从来没有立场，只有成本。谁能让你活下去，你就会跟谁合作，就这么简单。下面我们来看一下外国媒体对菲律宾转向的事件是如何分析的。
Richard, let me start with you because this is perhaps very pronounced in the case of the Philippines, which is a U.S. ally. But the squeeze in the energy markets and the inflation and I guess the challenges that's really bringing the economy is somewhat forcing a shift in focus towards perhaps closer ties with China. How real is this shift, Richard?
I mean, first of all, I've been in communication with folks who are in the Senate. Soon I'm going to talk to the presidential spokesman also to figure out what is exactly the situation, because we're getting a lot of mixed signal and information about how much reserves does the Philippines have, what is the status of the energy security of the country or lack thereof. But what's very clear is that the Philippines, I think, was the first country in the world to declare a national energy emergency. And shortly before that, of course, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who's known for a very tough stance on the South China Sea disputes, for being very close to the United States and other like-minded partners in the region. Just before that, he had an interview with you guys on Bloomberg when he said that the region as a whole, not only the Philippines, is going to confront a very, very serious restructuring in terms of its relationship with China, which was his polite way of saying that now that the Americans have put us in this bind, in this massive energy insecurity and economic crisis, we really have to hedge our bets. And part of hedging our bets is potentially reopening communication channels with China, including on issues that are very sensitive, geopolitically sensitive, but also legally and politically sensitive. And that includes disputed energy resources in parts of the South China Sea that are claimed by both the Philippines and China. And I think that's quite big, something big. And over the past few days, we saw that some of the Philippine senators, including the Senate President of the Philippines, these are people who were posturing as tough on China not long ago, posturing patriotically on this issue. Now we're saying that they support a joint exploration agreement between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea. So I think this is a strong signal from the Philippine government, probably a signal of frustration with the United States going ahead with this war without any consideration for its impact on its allies. But it's also a strong signal that the Philippines is open to have a much more pragmatic approach in its relationship with the Chinese.
Richard, just to follow up on that, right? So that's a good point you bring up, a statement of frustration. You know, that adage where you can't really trust the statement of someone who is under duress, right? Because that is an extreme scenario that individual is in. And I wonder how much public support really is there for that shift. Or are these statements just taking place in a very extreme scenario when it comes to the economy?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, David. I think absolutely the devil is in the details. We don't know what do we exactly mean by this. Is this a service contract? Is this going to be in the reed bank? Is this going to be a joint development agreement whereby the Philippines and China have to recognize each other's sovereign claims and kind of try to work it out under the international law, particularly United Nations Convention Law of the Sea? How is the Philippines going to work around its constitutional restrictions on this, on the fact that there was a 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling on this issue, whereby it put to question some of China's claims in the area? I think the devil is in the details. What is clear is that the Philippines is signaling frustration, and I would say, yes, to a certain degree, even desperation, because operationally speaking, it's going to take us years, if not more, even if we overcome the constitutional and political hurdles, if indeed we move ahead with exploration and then development of those resources, when in fact, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz challenge, we're looking at energy security crisis, as you mentioned earlier, in the coming weeks and the coming months. So there's an issue of time frame also here, but there's also an issue of state of mind here. And let's not forget, the Philippines will soon get into its own election season, and the front runner to be the next Philippine president as of now is Vice President Sara Duterte, who's known for a very pragmatic, if not friendly, ties towards China. So the other thing is that the China-friendly voices in the Philippines are feeling the wind in their sails. And I think that's also going to have some long-term implications for domestic debates in the Philippines on the direction of our relationship with China.
Richard, I'll bring you in on that thought, where you do have, let's call it U.S. military presence. And, you know, a lot of what you have in these when you look at U.S. allies in the region, it comes with a unique blanket of, let's call it security, we'll come to your defense if need be. How do you think U.S. allies in the region that do fall under that sort of orbit need to be thinking about that value add of U.S. security guarantees? Or is that mostly a thing of the past now at this point?
Well, I mean, as we speak, the Iranians are basically reinventing modern warfare through saturation strategy. Mass production of relatively cheap drones and increasingly advanced missiles have clearly overwhelmed and really, some would even say, completely dismantled the American military bases across the Persian Gulf. So that is a laboratory of data that the Chinese are going to study very carefully, especially because Iranians are apparently using BIDO and relying on some support, intelligence and information support on Chinese and the Russians. So there's that. And obviously here in Southeast Asia, we're also watching it because, as we speak, the Singaporeans, the Japanese, Filipinos, all of us are hosting one or another different sorts of facilities, whether it's R&R and maintenance on the part of Singaporeans, whether it's a full-scale military base in the case of Japanese. And in the case of the Philippines, it's still a moving target, right? We cannot have American military bases, legally speaking. That's unconstitutional since the end of Cold War. But the Americans have been trying to build facilities with rotational access. The exact status of that, the kind of weapon systems they can deploy, the expansion of the parameters of those facilities geographically, and also the sensitivity of their location, all of those things are still being negotiated as we speak. All of those things are still under consideration. So obviously, the conflict in Iran is going to directly restructure not only broadly our relationship with China, but also restructure our strategic calculus, our defense cooperation coordinates with the Americans. And of course, none of this happens in an isolation over the past decade, whether it's Trump 1, Biden, Trump 2. The general strategy is that, China is just so big and influential that the only way to effectively constrain it is through an integrated deterrent strategy, meaning everyone has to pitch in. There has to be this coordination with Japanese, with the Filipinos, with Singaporeans, among others. Now that's going to be much more difficult if each of these parties is will begin to recalibrate the relationship towards China, or some of them get cold feet about going all in with America, or all in with helping America, let's say on a Taiwan contingency, or in the case of the Philippines, also how far should we push back against the Chinese in the South China Sea. So that's why this is a moving target, and that's why the restructuring of the conversation will have serious operational implications down the road potentially.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective from Australia as well in this part of the Pacific. But I do wonder, in addition to what has been a pretty obvious pivot away from China over the past few years by the US, you now have the drawdown of not just that sentiment, but the drawdown of weaponry as well. How worried would you be when it comes to Taiwan?
Well, I mean, we see already in Taiwan that the KMT party's leadership is signaling that, maybe not now because the DPP is still in control, but this is based on my own conversation with Taiwanese folks earlier this year. I mean, they're already signaling that they still want a soft landing sometime down the road. We saw also earlier this year there were attempts by the KMT, who's obviously powerful in the parliament, to frustrate efforts at increasing Taiwanese defense spending, increasing Taiwanese purchase of high-end American weapon system, which is one of the supposed preconditions of Trump to be much more forthcoming in America's commitment to Taiwan in an event of contingency. But we know that any effective way to deter Chinese kinetic action, or should it happen to protect Taiwan, it will have to be coordinated. The Japanese will have to be involved. The Filipinos have to be involved. So you need basically a great wall of missile defense systems, a great wall of operational coordination from Guam to Okinawa to northern Philippines and obviously in Taiwan. Now, all of those things will have to be studied again very carefully in light of what's happening in the Persian Gulf right now, because whatever the Iranians can do, which obviously has surprised a lot of people, the Chinese can do on a far larger scale and with growing sophistication. So the game plan has completely changed in Asia, or at least there's a wake up call in this part of the world.